Well, hey, I'm Rebecca Folks, happy homemaker, mom to 4 busy kids, and online entrepreneur. I've spent over a decade in this space working with high-achieving, high-performing women who carry the weight of juggling all the things. After many ups and downs of creating balance between home life, work life, and a million kid activities too, I learned how to slow down to actually accomplish more of the important things. I believe in all the to-doing, there are deep spaces in women's hearts that are sacred to us. Conviction in our identity, hospitality around our tables, and that quiet strength that only comes when we lay our head down at night, confident we're doing a good job where it matters most. Consider this a melting pot of wisdom learned over the years. From homemaking and wellness to influencing and marketing, we're diving into the topics that have created more peace, more joy, and in the end, more margin in my business and my life. Welcome to Wide Open Spaces. Well, welcome back. I have been waiting to talk to this friend on the podcast since I first decided there would be a podcast, because she is someone that I live life with, but her story, I've heard her on other podcasts and interviewed in different environments. And every time, no matter how many times I've heard her story and heard her share, I'm so encouraged. I feel like I get to just see a visual of God's joy and God's goodness. And as we kind of touch in to family matters in this series, Andrea Mitchell, not the CNN reporter, a different one, is here to share about, she has 3 kiddos, and her first baby was born with a special diagnosis that kind of has a lifelong prognosis that just really has impacted their family with different kind of surprise challenges. And really any parent can identify with the hard and unexpected of what you think marriage or parenting is going to look like. And how Andrea shares is such an encouragement. I know we go a little bit longer in this episode, so if you break it up, that's okay. I think you are going to be bought in to her story. So head out on a walk, grab a cup of coffee, something, and get ready, because she is going to encourage you. And I hope you love this conversation with Andrea Mitchell. Well, welcome back. I am really thrilled about today, because I was thinking earlier when I first decided to do a podcast, it was like in the first 60, 90 seconds, I thought, well, I'm definitely having Andrea on here to talk about what we're going to talk about today, because it has been such a beautiful encouragement to me and just an example of God's goodness and faithfulness in an unexpected way over the last 10 years of getting to be Andrea's friend. And so, Andrea, I'm so glad that today is the day.
I mean, it's so fun because we get to talk all the time, but to talk about
Yes.
something so specific is exciting.
I know. I was telling her yesterday, I mean, Andrea loves a question. So sometimes people are like, will you tell me some questions about what you're going to ask before we get on there? And I was like, you don't want any questions. She's like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be whatever. And I was like, I'm so excited because there's probably going to be things that I end up asking you while we're focused in on this, that maybe I don't know the answers to. So that makes me more excited, because we're in this kind of series on family matters, if you've been following along. And so sometimes in family, I don't know if this happens at your house, but sometimes at my house, there's just unexpected things that happen along the way in being married, in being a sister, a daughter, a cousin, or a parent, that maybe when you were younger and you were thinking, this is what this is going to look like, that there were twists and turns to how that turned out. And Andrea's story, or a piece of her story, is like that. I'm sure there's other examples as well, but the kind of one that first comes to mind is kind of the story of her firstborn. And I wanted Andrea to Andrea, why don't you kind of share what kind of just the birth of Ella and your first pregnancy and all the things, and kind of up to speed of just the last 17 years.
How we got to where we are right now.
Yeah, how are we where you are now? Yes.
Funny, Joe, we were just talking about this with the boys yesterday. Joe and I had been married about 9 months when I got pregnant. So really early into our marriage, got pregnant, and I'm excited. It was, surprised, but also kind of where we were going at that age and stage of our life. And, um, you know, oddly, we'd only been together for a year and a half at that point anyways. So anyways, we got pregnant with Ella. Everything was great. Great pregnancy, first pregnancy, gained all the weight that as
Good.
you should with your
As
first
you should.
pregnancy. Bring
Especially
on.
early 20s when it just falls right off. So go ahead and do it.
And thinking that you will forever be at your wedding weight, so
That's
still so
right.
close to my wedding. I was like, I'll forever be this size.
Absolutely.
And so
More unexpected twist.
yeah, that one's still a 17-year journey too. And so totally normal pregnancy. When she was due mid-May, I was kind of the first out of our group of friends having babies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was actually about 8 weeks ahead of my sister having her first. So really, I was the first person kind of in my world having a baby.
Yeah.
And so went in, not a whole lot, didn't know really what to expect. Ella's born. The labor and delivery seemed fine. I mean, what do you know when it's your first? It's kind of the theme I felt of our entire, the whole thing is, who knows? It's your first. You're kind of figuring this out. And Ella was born with the cord partially wrapped, and there was a neonatal team in there, but they cleared her. Everything was fine. We do all of the post-delivery stuff. They bring her back to the room, after footprints and blood pressure and all the things that they do with newborn babies. And we nursed, and friends held her, and my family held her. And then she kind of got fussier and fussier, and like breastfeeding wasn't working. Like, we're a few hours into it, trying to figure it out. And I said, why don't we send her down to the newborn nursery? We'll let them kind of take care of her, watch her for a couple of hours. We'll get a couple of hours sleep because we had yet to sleep. And then we'll start this whole process over. And about, a couple of hours into sleep, we were like, we're ready for the baby. Let's try nursing again. And they said, well, actually your baby has been moved to the neonatal unit, that they call the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. She actually started seizing and having an irregular breathing, and we actually aren't sure she's going to make it. So, okay, that's when I went into freak out mode, and my husband went into prayer mode. And our world since then, Ella got diagnosed. She did survive. That was a traumatic experience, but she did survive. Came home what we thought was going to be a normal world. About a year into it, she was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And so here we are. She's 17, senior in high school, and nonverbal she verbalizes, but no conversation. She's not really mobile in the fact that she's not independent at all. She has a wheelchair. She's learning to use a walker, but she'll never be independent. There isn't a minute of her life that will really be independent. And that's where we are now.
And that's where you are now. And then you went on to have more kiddos.
Then we crazily went on. Is probably the question we got the most. Our second was born. We found out we were pregnant with him at her first birthday. So right around the time she's getting officially diagnosed with cerebral palsy, and we're realizing that this is going to be a lifelong thing. We also find out we're pregnant with our now middle. And everyone was like, are you terrified? And I said, no, I'm just going with the flow. God's got the next step going, and here we go. I thought we were just going to have this big, huge family. And then a couple of years later, we had Jonathan, our third. And we completed it with two very, very active boys. Mm-hmm. So we have a good balance here in the house.
Well, I thank you for bringing us up to speed, because I definitely, one thing it's so interesting about being Andrea's friend, and I tell her this sometimes, is the challenges. I mean, Ella is delightful, and anytime that we're Marco Poloing or FaceTiming kind of deal, she's laying on Andrea, and Andrea's, helping her and talking to her and bringing her into the conversation. And so, but there are challenges that surround kind of being, just the challenges of having extra challenges. And I'm like, what were your first thoughts? And did you even, as I'm even asking that, it was probably, what was it like when they were kind of saying, did they say this is what life will look like? Did they paint a picture like that? And so you could have first thoughts, or was it in survival mode? Like you were like, what was that? What was that like?
And when they first told us everything, I remember we were standing in the hallway outside of the neonatal intensive care
Is this
unit.
like right after birth? I mean, are you
Yeah,
like in the first 3 days or okay?
She's still in the hospital. So
Okay.
we're kind of at the point where they've done a lot of scans. We had to stay in there for a month, to get rid of the infection at birth. She actually ended up with group beta strep meningitis. So we have strep A in your throat, you have strep B in your birth canal. That's what she got. And it went straight into her spinal fluid and straight up to her brain. So that's what caused all the damage. Was an actual infection in her, they call meninges, or in your spinal fluid. So it went straight up to her brain and like fried, like when you think about your spinal column coming up to your brain, it like fried everything around there. So it wasn't like one spot or anything was damaged. It's the whole, in a way, a traumatic brain injury just from an infection. And so they've done scans and scans and scans. We're done with the infection itself. Now she's learning how to suck, swallow, breathe, which is what you have to do to get out of the hospital. Is you have to go out without a feeding tube. You have to be able to suck, swallow, and breathe at the same time with a bottle, or breastfeeding, however they want to do it. And so I'm talking to a neonatologist, and he says, well, she could be handicapped at any varying degrees of that, or she could just be really bad at math, which I'm really bad at. I mean, this is like a high level doctor. He's like, which I'm really bad at math. So that may be the only, like, at that moment, leaving the NICU, the day we walked out with her, no cords, no medicine, no scripts, no monitors, nothing. We literally walked out like you do with a healthy baby. We walked out a month into this and going, we've never had a baby off of monitors or without nurses, eyeballs on her 24 hours a day. And, but they were like, good luck. And we had
okay. So, but how long was she in there?
A month, 4 weeks.
So
exactly.
She was 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And you left. And I mean, at some point, like sometimes I think about this with friends that have kind of had special circumstances with infants, and the first couple of years, in a lot of cases, did it look pretty similar to your other, like to a typical, like when it's still a baby, so you're still doing all the things for them, like.
It did, but it was slower. But we knew, but everybody kept saying, well, that's okay. She's kind of a month behind because she had been in the hospital, and she had seized for about 72 hours when she was born. Like her brain just wouldn't shut off the seizure, kind of what they call infarcts or whatever. And so, so they were like, oh, it's probably meds still getting out of her system. So they kind of, for about 3 months. So she's born in May. We come home in June. For July, August, like kind of through the end of the summer and into the fall, they were like, well, it's probably just the meds. It's the delay of all the NICU stuff. And then it got to the point where she was about like 4-6 months old. And I would take her to lunch because I had friends that were having babies, starting to have babies at that point. My sister had, a baby 2 months, younger than mine. And I was like, wait a second. I would hold her up and her little head would just like roll off. Like it was like a little doll that was like stuck on a pivot. And if you held it up, the little head just bobbled. She had no head strength. She actually had no core or head strength till she was about 4. So, but that was kind of the first indicator. Cause like when you hold up a baby by the arms and they kind of drag their head and they finally pull it up, Ella could not do that until probably around her 4th birthday. So if you think about it, like 6 months, 7 months, we're still trying, we're trying to kind of prop her sitting and her whole little body would fall over. We'd go to the doctor, and the doctor, I think, was just so terrified to put a label on it. Because once you label it, it's there. It's like in the files, it's everything. So they just kept saying delayed, delayed, delayed. And then that was when by her 1st birthday, they were like, she has cerebral palsy, which just means a brain injury that creates motor delay. So it doesn't have anything to do with her they didn't know like intellectually where she would be or verbally where she would be or anything. They just knew it was definitely, her brain damage was so intense at birth that it was affecting her motor planning. So she was never going to motor plan. I say perfectly, neither do my boys. I mean, one runs really odd. It was never going to look typical. She was never going to live a typical physical life. But that could be anywhere from, if you see someone with cerebral palsy, they can be totally there intellectually and have a really odd gait or hold their arms tighter. So it could just be motor. With Ella's, it ended up being just a global delay. But at the time, we thought she's just slower. She's just
Yeah.
kind of lazy. She was like a
Taking her
Raggedy Ann
time
doll. She's like a baby doll at all times.
with a lot of really cute curly hair.
Oh, so much curly hair.
So much curly hair. What would you say over the last 16, 17 years out of something that's, because this is what I started to say a second ago that I just think's so interesting again about being your friend, and then I didn't complete the thought, was the way that you just live your life, that you talk about Ella, that you enter into other people's lives. Sometimes I forget the magnitude of everything that comes along with being Ella's mama. Like, because you just, I think it's incredible that it's really been a lot of fires and you have come out not smelling like smoke. Like, I think that someone that there has been trauma there for you as a parent. I mean, something that is traumatic, whether it's kind of our, expectations of this is what this is going to look like, or, it's your daughter. So what you think is a typical, I mean, even we talk about this because Avery and Ella are just a year apart. And so when Andrea's like, okay, what should we do for birthday gifts and things like that? We're like, okay, what about this? What about this? And, trying to make it an Ella gift, which Andrea is she's always decked out in the cutest clothes and accessories and all the
She
things.
can't fight
cute
back.
shoes.
That does help.
No,
Yeah.
it's still, lifelong getting to dress up. I love it. And, but I just think it's so incredible. And this is why I wanted you to be on here, because so many different people have different, we all do, crises and traumas and hard things. And I just see God's goodness on you and how you have just responded and like having joy and peace in all circumstances. And so I would love for you to kind of point out some of maybe the joy in the hard, because I think that's so, like, things that maybe were unexpected and you're like, but this was really hard, but here's something that, whether it was anything that brings up for you, you don't need much teeing up. I feel like you can probably think of things.
Well, I think we all have hard. I think the one thing to do is to never scale hard, and say someone else's hard is harder.
Yeah.
You've talked about your story on the podcast. And so if like we could never compare hards, we would never look back and go, oh, Andrea's hard's harder than Rebekah's, or, Rebekah's hard, with this or that. Like, it's just, God is so good that he gives each one of us our own story, our own journey. Even Joe and I have lived this differently. Like the way that I have, perceived everything, and my expectations as a mom of a daughter, thinking I'm going to do all these things with her, and this is how it's going to look, and this is how I'm going to raise her. And I mean, even Joe and I were laughing as we walked through the mall the other day, because we were like, there's some teenage girls, and he was like, I would never have let Ella leave the house in that. I'm like, you've never had the option to have an argument with her about whether something is cool and trendy and all of these things. So you can't even say how it would be, because you've never even had an argument. Like, you've never had a discussion with her. You've never had a, like, we tell her what to wear, because we literally dress her and she leaves in a little happy mood. So hard is just hard. I just want to put that out first, so that when people are like, oh, I could never do what Andrea's done. Yes, you could, because you just show up and you do it.
Yeah.
And I could probably say the same thing about everybody's hard that's listening, and say, I wouldn't want to, lose a husband, or, have to go through trauma with my kids, or have to, have a hard relationship with my parents growing up, or whatever. Like, we all have God doesn't spare any of us from the wilderness.
Yeah.
It's just, they all look so different. And ours feels longer because it's forever apparent. And so I would say one thing that I felt like was really key is we were in a church that wrapped arms around us. We were already in a Sunday school class, which a lot of people do, like community group, but we were already in a small enough group of people that when this happened, when the bottom fell out, when we go from being, the cute couple in the hospital having their first baby to this child isn't surviving. Our Sunday school class came to the hospital in the waiting room, got on their faces physically on the floor, and were out loud praying, reading scripture, like calling other people that were like standing outside the waiting room into the prayer time with them. I actually had a friend having a baby on the same day at the same hospital, was recovering in the room next to me, and her parents, after we'd recovered and we're kind of talking in the hallway, said we could not figure out what was happening, but we just stood there and prayed alongside this group, not knowing it was you. And
wow.
and so I think community starting out was so key for us, because although they had no idea how to walk us through it, the fact that they were there, like, just literally holding up our arms when I was crumbling in a hospital bed, was so key. And through that group, we had mentors that were, they're our parents' age, and that had lost a little girl when she was 6. So they were the only people we'd ever known in life that had really lost someone that were key to us. And they walked into the NICU, and the first thing they said is never ask why, because no answer this side of heaven will ever be good enough. Like it'll never feel like, oh, well, it's because it's to save this marriage or to pull this person back down on their knees or to lead this person to Christ. And it was like, but is that enough for my child to go through a life of pain?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, never ask why, because it just won't, unless the Lord sends you a written note and explains to you why, and you feel like that's, exactly, like it'll forever feel like, but why my kid? Why my child? And then Joe and I just decided very early on not to ask what if, kind of now we can lolook back because we really have healed so much over it, and we're just in a really sweet season.
Like,
that I
what
can look
if
and
something we had taken a test, or we had done what if this doctor, like that kind of what if? What do you mean?
Kind of. Okay, God actually protected me from that what if. A lot of people were like, do you want to sue the doctor? I was like, the doctor? Nobody did anything malicious. The reason that it all happened is you take a test at like 34, 36 weeks pregnant for group beta strep to see if your birth canal has it. Mine was negative. But that was just a negative test. And I just had to have faith that the Lord knew how this was all going to flow, and that it was nobody's malicious. There was no malice in how it all happened. So there was no one to hold accountable to it other than the Lord. Like the Lord was the only person I could have ever held accountable to how this all went down. So I never had a question about like, what if we had picked a different doctor? What if we had taken a second test? I mean, maybe like, what if there had been automatic antibiotics? But that's just not how the world works. And so it was more like, what if Ella wasn't handicapped? What would our life look like? And now we can do that. We can say, if Ella wasn't handicapped, we wouldn't live in this house. The boys, we don't know what the pregnancies after that would have looked like. We don't know how many more kids we would have had. We don't know. We'd drive a different, everything that we do is attached to a wheelchair, accessibility, even vacations, like how does that work for her? There's so many things that it's like, would our lives look different if she was different? Yes, but every aspect of our life would look different. So it's almost impossible at this point to separate the two. And then just to truly trust that, because we were in this Sunday school class that was teaching us so well how to parent, they were also just teaching us really well, like how to sit with our hands wide open and say, okay, God, these kids are yours. Like whether they're healthy or not healthy, they're troubled or not, like whether they're struggling in, school, like they're yours. We are only here to steward them. And so it was key for us. The Lord had placed us in this church, in this class with these specific people, knowing that we were about to go through this. We're still in that class.
I started saying that's why you're still in the class.
Still in the class.
Almost 20 years later, because you're like, no, not leaving. I found these people, and we're going to stay right here.
You're gonna have to move some things around us. They have changed our classroom at the church probably about 5 different times. I'm sure they're like, could the Mitchells just not find us again? And here we are. We just
showing up every Sunday. Another thing that I tell Andrea that I just see in her is it really is like an example of the gift of faith. And I feel like I see that in you, and so like it has just kind of bled into so many other areas of your life where you just trust and believe and have faith in the sovereignty of God and his protection and provision, and it's going to work out. And like one way or another, we might not know what it's going to look like or if it would have been our best case scenario or whatever, but it is going to work out and God has his hand on it. And I love that about being your friend, is because it's such an encouragement, and it has built my faith because of just being like the proximity to you. So I'm grateful for that. What would you say, even though you knew, well, I mean, just kind of over maybe that first year or couple of years, and maybe you started to think, okay, so life might look like this, or my life might look like that. What was maybe do any like surprise challenges stick out that, whether have been kind of like, this has been a harder part, or something that took more
Yeah.
faith? These were the
Yeah.
faith builders right here.
So you know how we always say like, oh, if it's not happening now, it'll happen eventually. Like everyone goes through their wilderness, and like you think, oh, this woman of faith has gone through cancer, and like that was her wilderness, and she overcame it. Or like you watch people and you expect they're going to go through something hard, they're going to overcome it, and then there's kind of this redemption story on the other side. And so we've gone through Ella's birth, her diagnosis, and even Will being born, which was great. I mean, he's a gift in so many different ways at the time. It was such a balm to my heart to have a typical pregnancy and a typical delivery and baby and all of those things. Although I did not realize that babies screamed as much when they came home, because Ella didn't make a sound for 5 months. So I was like, wow. But then when she was about 2 years old, she had a seizure. Luckily we had someone that was helping us out at the time, and she found her, but Ella was having a seizure. And then she had another one like 4 months later, and then she had another one like 3 months later. And then it became a season. So about 4 years of 911 calls, ambulance rides, going to the hospital, trying to get the hospital to get her seizure under control, and then spending 3 days in the hospital trying to figure out what had caused the seizure this time. And that,
I'm covered in goosebumps, like full blown survival mode. Like, am I going to lose my baby? Yeah.
Every single time. So
Every
we've had
time.
Becky on the podcast before. Becky was part of our text message that we would, I mean, this was probably 13, 14, 15 years ago. And, I mean, there was a short group. If we didn't have Facebook, we weren't blasting it out at the time. And I was texting on a little flip phone. And we were going back to the hospital, and it would be in the middle of the night every time. God was good even in the season. Isn't that neat when you can go, this was hard, but here's where God was good in the middle of thinking my child's about to die because her body can't physically do this anymore. And that was, Joe probably lived in the world. This is where, God gives us different measures of grace, even as parents, is Joe kept thinking this is going to kill her. And I kept thinking, we're fine, because as long as we're with the paramedics and we're at the hospital, then we'll be okay. But Joe was thinking this is the last one. Like every time, this is the end. And because, I mean, watching your child have a grand mal full body seizure is heart wrenching. Like it's probably the most heart wrenching part of physically of her whole journey, is watching her and realizing you can't fix it. Like, and as a dad, I don't want to tell his story, but as a dad, he kept saying from the moment she was born, you have this protector mentality of like, I am to protect this child. And she's born, she gets sick, and he's like, I couldn't protect her like that. And so even in the seizures, he was really struggling with, I can't protect her. I can't stop this. It's not stopping. It's getting worse. And so that was a really hard, dark season, just because we never slept, because it only happened at night when she was sleeping. And so we never slept thinking this is going to be it. This is going to be the night we don't hear her. It goes too long. The ambulance doesn't get here fast enough. We had one where we gave her meds at home. They gave her meds in the bus, and then they had to intubate her to help her breathe so that they could give her more meds to make it stop. And so, but in all of it, again, it was just like, you have to give up some control because you have no control. I mean, nothing teaches you that someone else is in control other than I'm doing everything I can do. I'm doing everything I know to do. When people are like, well, I didn't know I should have been doing this, or we should have been doing this med. I'm like, I did everything we knew to do at the time. And we just had to keep praying that the Lord would sustain her, sustain us Joe has prayed every night her entire life that God will heal her. He's prayed over her out loud. And it's okay if he doesn't. Like, that's what we had to come to the point where, like, we'll ask him daily. But if it comes, if he never does it, this is still, we still have to find joy in this story, in this life, and where we are.
I'm going to try to talk, because I mean, I've heard you tell just, our friends over the years, like, yeah, Joe's in there. Like, she can hear her because I have the baby monitor, because they can hear Ella even at, 17. And so she's in there and she can hear
every night. Praying out loud over her, like singing. He sings this sweet little hymn that mattered to him when he was young. He sings it over her. And I just think for him, there's a security in that. And just knowing that he's doing it. And it's interesting because that's not my prayer. Like, that's his prayer for her. My prayer is that he will just continue to, like, grow us and sustain us.
Yeah. Okay. I have zero segues there. Just God bless Joe Mitchell. He's just something else. Love Joe Mitchell. And tell me, okay, I mean, you don't really know. I started to say, what kind of effect has this had on your marriage? But I mean, you don't really know you're married. I mean, you were married for 9 months when you found out, when you got pregnant. And then, so, I mean, you don't, but do you have an answer to that, or something that any thoughts on that?
Yes. I would say the season where Ella was seizing and she was sick, probably from the time she was really born until probably just recently, like in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, when we really felt like we were in a good health season. But it affected our marriage because everything revolved around her.
And then weren't you sick with one, like during one of the births of the boys?
After all 3 kids. So after Ella, I had double mastitis, so I couldn't even see her in the NICU one day. After William, I had appendicitis, so I had to get my appendix out within weeks.
Yes.
And then after Jonathan, I actually had the same infection Ella had at birth, group B strep, I had in my kidneys. So all 3 of my kids, within weeks of giving birth, I had to go back to the hospital.
You
I was
had
in the hospital.
medical issues. Okay. Yeah. Insane. Okay.
So
sorry, I interrupt, but I mean, I was just thinking, and then there's extra stress because mama is not, there's extra responsibility. Yeah.
I just think Ella was a focus. Like, I mean, it was life or death. So, like, so often when we're like, oh, we're really focusing on one child or a different child or whatever, it's, for you, there's so much baseball and volleyball, and for us, there's basketball and all these things. But for Ella, hers really was life and death. Like, when we say, oh, it's not really life and death, well, in that situation, it actually was. And so it was such a hyper focus. He was so protective of her that it was almost like his protection of her overshadowed our marriage.
Yeah, I can see that.
Not
seem
like looking back, we didn't fight, but it was like, I need to go on a date with you. But we would go on a date and our nanny would call us and be like, hey, she just seized. We called 911. Like, I mean, we went to Fort Worth for one overnight finally, and she had a seizure and we had to come home and go to the hospital and do all the things. So it really did feel like, even if he had tried to date me, it felt hard. And it's so interesting. The Lord is his timing is so odd sometimes. That's all. I mean, all we can say is like, I don't get it. That now we have all this time in the world together. Like, now, he works from home and has his own business. I work from home, have my own business. At that point, he was working full time, like 7 a.m. to 5 or 6 p.m. in an oil and gas, trading company. And so he was gone all day. I had to call him the first time. I had to put her in a car seat crying. But this seems normal mom to me. Yeah. There's a little bit of normal mom in, like, I can't get the straps on the car seat out far enough to get the little baby arms in there.
Absolutely.
But then you add in the fact, like, but her head's rolling off. So I also can't get her, it's double. And so he literally left work, came home. He's always been loving and kind. I do think there was a season where he thought, I'm going to lose her, Ella, and our marriage will survive it. We'll get through these hard seasons eventually. And I mean, now we're in such a great place. with that, I mean, marriage is hard. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
You can have a sick kid or a healthy. I mean, I feel like we have more conversations about our very healthy, very active, very, character building boys than we ever have about Ella anymore. So marriage is just hard, no matter
Well, it's probably
what
been
you.
so faith building to be able to kind of have the surrender, because in every situation we're kind of out of control. I mean, we have Jesus, we have the power of prayer. I believe, that God hears our prayers and that they matter and all the things. But we also believe in the sovereignty of God. And so just that daily, I mean, it's literally a daily surrender, like thinking about Joe praying every single night, and a surrender of like, I'm still going to ask. Like I'm still going to ask. Okay, I
Yeah,
have to add,
go
yes.
please. No, I was going to say, yeah, the having to ask is so interesting. People, we've been told over the years, like, oh, well, Ella's still sick because y'all haven't had enough faith. And, people have different perspectives of how God heals, why he heals, and all of this. And we've just had to kind of be like, no, this is where God has her and where God has us. And so it's really not a measure of our faith or not what God's chosen to do with her.
Tell me then, for people that are listening and thinking, because people, I think people, I mean, like in any situation, you want to help, you want to say something encouraging, you want to say something nice. What would be some do's and don'ts if you have a friend and they're going through a pregnancy, or they've gotten a bad diagnosis, or their child's 4 and they just got a bad
Yeah.
diagnosis, whatever it looks like. What would you say?
That's probably the hardest thing because like,
Yeah, every family's different.
you can ask me anything. You can
Yeah.
literally be like, "Hey, does Ella's brain look like other people?" Like you can ask me anything. Like, people ask me, do you think she'll, will she pass away early? Like, no,
Mhm.
by the way, she won't. But like people ask crazy questions and I choose not to be offended by them. I
Yeah.
choose when people say, "What's wrong
I
with
see
her?"
that in you. Yeah.
to say, "Oh, well, her diagnosis is cerebral palsy, her brain got injured." Because people like sometimes people don't know how to word things, and that's
Yeah.
not on them. I think back 18 years ago, right now, pregnant with my first daughter, I would have worded it horrible, and I probably still do. I apologize publicly to everybody I've worded something poor to. So I think you have to know the person.
Yeah.
I think if your heart is sincere, if you truly just want to know, like, how is Ella? Tell me a little bit about her story, or explain to me, something you're curious about. Golly, I'll tell people I won't have Ella with me. I'll be like, "Oh, that's a cool wheelchair," and they're like, "Thanks," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." So like, some people don't even want you to identify that there's like even like
Yeah. Yeah.
something extra, and that doesn't phase me. So I think you have to maybe know the person well enough, and then if you are a parent of the special needs or a child that has different needs or different neuro pathways or whatever, that you're just really gracious with people, that you want people to ask you questions
Yeah.
and you want them to ask it wrong because you want to be able to help them ask it right for the next
Yeah.
person. So I think I would rather educate all day long and explain and inform rather than take offense, because I would rather, we have kids. When the boys were little, kids are so pure in the sweetest and like most uncomfortable way. Like we have these
Yeah,
kids. And
for
so
sure.
whether it's you with your boys or me with my boys, and they see somebody that looks different than them, they're just going to blurt out, ask a
Yep.
question.
Yep.
And so we were on the elevator one time and a little girl was like, "Why is she in that?" And the boy, I think it was Jonathan, was like, "She likes it. Like, she likes riding in her chair." And I was like, "Well, okay, well, okay. If that's what you think, that Ella just likes riding in a chair, that's why she does it." He was like 4 at the time. But I just think there's a sweetness to when kids ask that.
Yeah.
Ella drools, and so kids still will be like, "Why is she got stuff falling out of her mouth or whatever?" I'm like, "Oh, well, her mouth just doesn't tell her that it's there and to swallow, and so sometimes it falls out the wrong way." And we just, we have little, shirt covers, and we wipe it up, and we just go on with our lives. They're like, "Okay," like totally grossed out by it, and I get it. John used to say she was leaking on him when she would drool on him. She's leaking on me. I think for all of us, whether it's you with your story and someone's trying to figure out how to ask you a question, or it's me with my story, or it's, someone that you kind of can't figure out what's going on. I think just being heartfelt, intentional with the way you're asking it is like huge. Like, I don't know how to ask this, but I'd love to ask you more about Ella. Great. Ask away, or someone who's really closed off and doesn't want to even acknowledge that their child has like a special or different need. It's like, can I ask you some questions? And a lot of times they'll be like, I don't really want to talk about it. And you're like,
Yeah.
Now I know where the boundary is. Like, so I just think,
yeah. And as a friend, also not being offended if someone's response is, or someone that's trying to enter in, maybe it's another child at your kid's school or whatever, that if you do ask something and that's the response, not to be offended. One thing you told me when I had a friend that was kind of a new medical mama with different challenges and it was someone close to me, and you said, don't quit like pursuing them and like telling them about things that are going on with you, or like all of a sudden only talking about that one thing and thinking I just remember you giving that kind of, do you remember that kind of encouragement?
I think it's that thought that grief and joy can exist at the same time. So while I have Ella, who is like her physical body is kind of falling apart, I have friends that are having perfectly healthy. My sister, my best friend, a dear friend I'd know for a long time that had the same hospital, same doctor, same week Ella was born, had a perfectly healthy baby. Like, and then our Sunday school class, like just, it's that season where everyone kind of has their first baby all at one time. And I remember people being like, do you want to come to the play date? And I'm like, yeah, Ella will play. She'll be in a car seat, but I still want to come and spend time with you.
Yeah.
And I would leave some of them crying. Just my own heart is just breaking, realizing this, like our life wasn't going. There were so many times where we walked by a soccer field one day and I asked the dad, oh, what age are these girls? And they were like, 5-year-olds. And I was like, oh, okay. Ella's 5. This would be our life. She's like, still like, she's like she's in a wheelchair for the rest of her life. So, just got in the car and just lost it. There were different seasons. There still are. There are going to be when our friends' kids start getting, go to college, get married. They're starting to drive cars now. Like, there will always be seasons that are hard. I can't remember what your question was, but life is just hard. You have to.
Yeah. Well, I think it was about still bringing them in to your, like, to connecting and just whether it's a survivor's guilt or whatever that your people are experiencing. You're like, oh, I don't want to tell them about this because I don't want to make them sad or make them think, like bring up things, and just not projecting that. And still, that was just a good word. And I appreciated that thought.
I'm grateful for those. I'm grateful for the friends that will say, do you want to come to, so-and-so's play? They're in a play. Do you want, so Ella's in a inclusive cheer team. So she cheerleads at the varsity games or JV games or wherever. And so the other night, the varsity cheerleaders, so the state girls that are seniors, just along with Ella in high school, they bring what's called spirit stangs down to cheer with the varsity team because they're all just, at the stands. And it's so sweet. Is it hard? Is there a part of me that just grieves the fact that that's not her world? Absolutely. I will grieve it until we're both gone that she can't walk and talk and have a conversation with me and dance at a Taylor Swift concert. And even, profess Jesus. Like, she'll never verbally profess. And so all of those things are hard. They're heartbreaking. She'll never get married. She'll never have kids. Try telling a little girl when she starts her cycle why she has to have it when she'll never have a baby. Like, I lost it. So I think life is hard, but if you miss out on the sweet things that your friends are going through because you think your heart is too hard, that would be like, going through a divorce and never celebrating a marriage. Like, that there's good, that there is sweetness, and it's okay for you to grieve what you have lost and to completely rejoice in what God's doing in someone else's life. And even for me and for you, like for me to be able to grieve Ella's life and celebrate the boys' lives, for you to grieve, a loss of something and then to rejoice in the redemption of something. So I do believe.
And that is all over. I remember even
Yeah.
recently we had a friend starting a new business and she was like kind of nervous to tell different friends about it, or what are people going to think, or this, that, and the other. And I said, here's the deal. You need to go to Andrea first, because Andrea is the hype girl, and Andrea is going to be so excited and she's going to pump everybody else up, because she's just naturally going to be like, tell me everything. You have a million questions and all that. And I just see how, it is like a living, breathing picture of what Satan tried to use for, like, to rob and kill and destroy dreams or thoughts. Or, you could have never had another baby of a thought of what if. Instead, that was never even a thought. And instead, God has used that into these gifts of your personality and how you've been able to pour out to other people your faith and your encouragement and your joy, and just a picture of God's goodness. And so I wonder if, even as we kind of wrap up, if you have any just kind of that for whether it's a friend, like you have there's a mom that maybe she's about to be a medical mama, or she's someone in your community and you just want to offer connection, or you are a special needs mama and you're listening. Do you just have any Andrea-isms for that?
I don't know if I have any Andrea-isms. I would just say one of the things I have enjoyed are people that can find joy in life through the hard and the hurt. And the people that it is hard to be in community with are people that are victimized. Like, I'm not a victim of Ella's circumstances. It is hard and has definitely challenged our lives in a way. It has, it will affect everything that we do from now on. But you have to choose not to be the victim of what has happened to you, around you. And so I think whether you're about to go through it, and I would just pray, honestly, if you're about to go through anything similar to this, that the Lord will shield you from the things that you don't need to know yet, and that He will wrap you with people that just will love you well, even on, even as small as bringing a meal, as small as, dropping off trash bags and paper plates at your door, the little hostessy things, all the way to, watching the other kids so that you can, do all the medical things that you need to do. I pray that you have a community that surrounds you, but I pray that within that community that you will seek joy, that you'll seek joy in your family, that you seek joy in your kids, that you'll seek joy in finding something outside of that child. Like, although Ella defines a lot of who I am, she isn't me. Rebecca actually has done something really sweet for me, and she may not even know it. She said recently that I can't take credit for all my kids' wins and not take, fault for all of their losses. And so if I have to balance those things. And so with Ella, I don't take, fault for all the things that have gone wrong for her life, but I also can't take credit for all the things that have gone well in her life. And that keeps me from her story being my story. It's just a part of my story. Because I get to choose how I want those wins or losses to affect me.
Over-identifying.
Yeah. I think, with our kids, we want the best for them. I want the best for Ella. And if I could wave a magic wand and Ella could have a conversation with me, that would probably be my first thing. And that she just have relationships that are meaningful. But within minutes of getting on this, right before this podcast, I had a friend message me and say, my friend just got to feed Ella lunch and she just fell in love with her. And there's no conversation. There are no words. And the Lord is so gracious to give Ella all of these sweet people that love her. I think if any of us can have a conversation, the Lord is, how much more can the Lord, bless our lives when we just actually sit down and talk about all these things, as opposed to holding them all in and being, injured by them.
So good. So sweet. Andrea, thank you for sharing your story. I'm encouraged. I hope others were encouraged as well. Y'all should definitely follow Andrea on social media. Is it just Andrea Mitchell on
Andrea
Instagram?
E. Mitchell, so you don't get the
That's right. The CNN reporter. Yeah. The Andrea Mitchell on Instagram, especially because she shares just lots of thoughts and encouragement for anybody, but also especially for special needs mamas and families. So make sure you share her profile. I'll put that in the show notes. Andrea, thank you for coming on.
I love you.
I love you. You just finished another episode of Wide Open Spaces. My hope is always that you felt encouraged as you listened. And if you found this valuable, will you share it with a friend today? Tag me if you do. I always love seeing your favorite takeaways. I'm so glad you were here, and I'll see you back next week. Same time, same place. See you then.